So all three types of trinkets were covered in part 1. Now it's time to apply them in combat. When it's just you solo controlling a raid, there's two ways you could use them. One way is if you cycle them regularly and non-stop throughout the raid. If you'd like, you can start off with the CC trinket since it has a long cooldown, which will be ready by the time you reach most first boss fights. Or you can start off with a normal and pet trinket if you choose to just cycle these two at the start of a raid. It's okay to start off with a pet trinket first, since the very beginning of a raid or a boss fight doesn't always immediately need your major fight buff from the normal trinket. Now let's talk scenario. When you begin cycling, let's say you choose to start off with the standard trinket. At the halfway mark on its cooldown, pop the pet trinket. Then by the time the pet trinket reaches the halfway mark on its own cooldown, the normal trinket will be ready for you to activate again. This just allows for short spaced out fight buffs. What you're doing is you're allowing for spread out periods of fight buffs that can better match random events during a raid, such as boss fights that have certain phases that would require a healer to spam power for more heals out, and in some cases you could use it as an indicator to boss fights with timed attacks. The circumstance you would use the technique are in prolonged boss battles, especially if there's no DPS by the group, or if it just so happens to take long because you're at entry level with that instance. You could also use them in simple and straightforward runs. By spacing out your fight buffs, you can save them for oh crap moments when you need to pop a power supercharge with it. Or you can still cycle them regularly and non-stop, but this time use their fight buffs right after one ends. So let's start off with the standard trinket. When the 20-second marker hits, which is between 2 and 3 o'clock on the cooldown, pop the pet trinket. Here, you'll get a 40 consecutive second fight buff. Then, follow that by popping the Central City trinket and take advantage of the 60-second fight buff from that. And in total, you'll have 100 consecutive seconds of a fight buff if you use the CC trinket strictly for fight buffs and not regen or the shield. I mean, you could use them for that, but you would have to pop them when it comes time to restart the 20-second buff cycle with the CC trinket, which may be tricky for some players. So choose between the pet or normal type trinket when you start off. Again, between 2 and 3 o'clock is when you will use your next trinket. Let's say you use the pet type second. Once your pet trinket reaches between 2 and 3 o'clock on its own cooldown, pop your Central City trinket. Memorize your buffed pot ticks or use the cooldown on the two trinkets as markers. Remember, the halfway mark on both of them means that 1 minute has gone by. Around 5 o'clock on either cooldown means that 20 seconds has also gone by. So that'll be the time for you to pop the second fight buff from the CC trinket. Around 8 o'clock will be time for your third activation. Just mark these points in your head. Between 2 and 3 o'clock, around 5, around 8, and around 10 o'clock will be your 20-second intervals. If you don't like this trick, you can use other timing tools like Distract and Grandeur, a timer, or just look for when your pot tick goes to normal. It's okay to miss one buff pot tick. Just don't stress too much over this method. The whole idea is that you want to use those fight buffs rather than not. Sometimes I change it up and I do my CC trinket first just in case I need to pop the normal type trinket during a specific boss phase where the healer will need power to spam more heals out. If there's extremely high DPS coming from your group, you can afford to use all your fight buff trinkets in one period during a boss fight like I described. That's because with high DPS and depending on boss mechanics, you won't be fighting for longer than 1 minute and 40 seconds. Remember what I said earlier, all three of your trinket buffs will last for 100 seconds if used right after each other. The likelihood of a 2-minute or more boss fight is low, so you might as well throw all your power healing tricks into it. Think of a blitzkrieg. You need to be able to judge which raids and which players can handle speedy runs because that ultimately determines how you can cycle these trinkets. The other way you could use the trinkets is if you use them strategically, much like what I mentioned earlier about using them as an indicator to an attack. Pay attention to skull icons, which are scripted attacks. Look for specific animations for bosses and watch for particular areas in a raid map where most NPCs are present. Think about when you're going to need to use your power supercharges and when you'll need to use your trinket buffs for instant power heal spamming. Watch out for threats. Prep the healer so they know it's okay to spam power and cycle your Vite trinkets to lethal NPC phases. The reality of it is you'll reach a point where you'll actually be using all of these options in a raid. You just have to run an instance a few times to know what to look out for, and then you can mix it up. You can use spread out buffing in hallways, consecutive buffing in some boss fights, and strategic buffing for more mechanical bosses. Always make sure to pop your power supercharge with the standard trinket since it gives the most Vite. For Battle Drone, pop the standard trinket towards the end of the drone's pot cycle to maximize power out on its big burst power heal on the 30th second. Sometimes I don't use special abilities on the CC trinket either because I reserve it just for the Vite buffing. I buff pot and then I enter instant power heal spams with power reduction from the weapon mastery combos. Although occasionally if the healers need power right away, I just spam defib consecutively. Because the CC trinket has a long cooldown, and if you're using a controller, I'm not sure how well this works on PC, place a CC trinket in your XX slot on the utility belt. This will allow you to quickly and easily switch it out with other tools. So tools for power healing, Vite sodas, consumables, and even your orbital can go there. When the form is gone, I press start and then I reach for whatever else I can make use of from my inventory. I put a tool in my first inventory slot. It's just a quick start, then one tap over, and then press start again once it's equipped. When there's two controllers, talk to your partner about trinket cycling. Either use the trinket strategically during specific boss attacks and phases like I described earlier, or if your partner has 3 trinkets like you do, both of you can take turns casting pot while cycling your trinkets. What you'll do is one controller will start off with the CC one, then the standard, and then the pet type. After those buffs are gone, let the other controller know that your trinkets are all on cooldown. It will then be their turn to pop their trinkets consecutively, but they have to cast power over first, so their buffed Vite is registered. You can say words like trinket or whatever else you want to use to indicate when one of you is ready to pop your trinket, or if you're letting the other one know that it's time to cast. Just use short key words so you don't interfere with raid callouts. In some cases, if you run with a controller you know, ask or look for their pot tick and their buffed pot tick. If you don't see those numbers, then you just pop your trinkets. Your vitalization will automatically register as highest and go towards the team when you use these trinkets, provided the controllers are within a vitalization range of each other. And by that I mean as long as the other controller's buffed Vite isn't less than your base, then their trinket buff will normally register. Usually you'll get 4 buffed pot ticks with a 20-second cycle unless you time your trinket cast right on top of your blue tick while an already in progress pot cycle is going on, but this can be tricky to pull off during combat. One downside though, if one or both of you wearing the Elite Affinity mod called Power Strategist, you'll actually have to wait until your Affinity pot cycle restarts on the 19th second in order for your buff pot tick to register. The Affinity pot cycle doesn't allow for overrides when using any power to start a buffed pot cycle. So you'll have to let each other know where in your cycles that you're at, or pop your trinket and then cast your pot in sync with the blue numbers of the existing pot cycle until you see your buff is up. This allows for your pot cycle to register with the Elite Affinity bonus on. If you don't want to go through all that, remember, your Vite is buffed, and it's not just your power over time that benefits from it. Just spam or frequently use your instant power heals because they're buffed too. The 2-controller trinket cycling technique allows for an almost consistent Vite buff on the team. Power from both your power over time and your instant power heals are reaching the group. Combine this with the other 1 or 2 tricks, and you'll never need to go above 2 controllers for raids. This is also a way to get your friend ready to becoming an independent controller. With you there directing, it'll teach them under what circumstances they would have to power a team with tricks and tools on their own.